We're sinking. Can you all please come?
And is everybody on board in good health otherwise?
Yeah, everybody's on board.
A voice cuts through the interference, one of a group of teenagers stranded in open water off a remote island, calling for help. Their boat has stopped working. It's the 4th of July, and in a matter of hours, one of them will be gone. This isn't a reenactment. This is real audio obtained through a public records request and only made public this week. For 11 days, the world has been asking the same question: what really happened on Horn Island? Now, for the first time, we're hearing the moment things started to go wrong. But this audio raises just as many questions as it answers. Because somewhere between this call for help and the moment the boat returned to shore without him, an 18-year-old boy disappeared. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what that audio reveals, why investigators believe it matters, and what still doesn't add up. Because this case isn't over, and the truth is still coming out. Welcome back to CAC Crime Trending. Today's case, the disappearance and death of Nolan Wells. Before we get into it, make sure you're subscribed, because this investigation is still unfolding, and we'll be bringing you every update as it breaks. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from today. Ocean Springs, Mississippi sits just east of Biloxi, a quiet coastal community where the Gulf is never more than a few minutes away, and boat trips out to the barrier islands are simply part of growing up. It's the kind of town where a name like Nolan Wells wasn't just recognized, it meant something. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. To his coaches, his teachers, and his teammates, he was a multi-sport athlete who carried himself with quiet confidence. In 2025, he graduated from Ocean Springs High School, closing out a run that had made him a fixture on the football field. His coach, Jake Bramlett, later described him as more than just a talented player, someone who treated people with respect, worked hard without complaint, and led simply by the way he carried himself. After graduation, Nolan enrolled at Southwest Mississippi Community College, where he earned a spot as a wide receiver. He was expected back on campus the Monday after the 4th of July weekend to begin training camp for the upcoming season. Teammates were waiting. Life, in every sense, was moving forward. At home, Nolan was raised by his parents, Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley, a tight-knit family that, by every account, was close. On the evening of the 3rd of July, 2026, Nolan cooked salmon for his family, a small gesture before the holiday weekend began. It was a simple dinner, nothing out of the ordinary, the kind of moment families rarely think to hold on to, because there's no reason to believe it might be one of the last. After dinner, Nolan got ready to leave, heading out to spend the night with friends ahead of the holiday. His mother would later describe that final goodbye in the simplest possible terms. It was hug, kiss, and he left. No dramatic exit, no warning signs. Just an 18-year-old boy saying goodbye to his mother the way he probably had 100 times before. He had no idea it would be the last time she would see him alive.
Please come.
The
NBC
4th of
News has
July
obtained
fell on a
audio as part of a
Saturday in
records request
2026.
that details
For Nolan and his friends, the holiday meant a boat trip to Horn Island, a stretch of coastline that had become one of the most popular local destinations for exactly this kind of celebration. Horn Island isn't like the beaches most people picture when they think of the Mississippi coast. It's a federally protected barrier island, part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, managed by the National Park Service. That designation matters because it means the island is deliberately kept undeveloped. There's no staff station there, no drinking water, no shelter of any kind, no cell service, no way to call for help if something goes wrong. Anyone who sets foot on Horn Island is, by design, cut off from the mainland the moment their boat pulls away from the dock, reachable only by private boat, reliant entirely on whatever supplies they brought with them. And yet, for people who grew up on the Mississippi coast, that isolation is part of the appeal. Untouched beaches, shifting shoreline, a kind of quiet you can't find anywhere closer to town. For Nolan, this wasn't new territory. According to his family, it wasn't unusual for him to visit the island with friends. He had done this before. This was familiar ground. But the 4th of July, 2026 was not an ordinary day on Horn Island. This was a holiday, and the island had filled up with people the way it always does when the weather is good and the water is calm. By some estimates, nearly 200 people had gathered on that stretch of shoreline that day. A sprawling, informal gathering of boats anchored together, coolers, music, groups of friends moving between one another's company. It was less a private outing and more a floating block party spread out across the sand in the shallows. Within that crowd, Nolan and his friends were just one group among many. But by every account gathered so far, in the images and videos taken that day, Nolan stood out, not for anything he did, but simply for who was standing next to him. Nolan appears to have been one of very few black people present. It's a detail that, on its own, might mean nothing. But it's a detail that would take on enormous weight in the days that followed, once the questions about what happened to him began to multiply. As for the island itself, Horn Island carries a danger that isn't always obvious from the surface. The shoreline doesn't slope gradually the way a typical beach might. In places, the water can go from 3 feet deep to 20 feet deep within just a few steps. It's the kind of terrain that looks safe, that feels safe, right up until it isn't. A hazard familiar to locals, but easy to underestimate on a holiday afternoon. There's no confirmed record of when the boat carrying Nolan and his friends actually arrived at the island that morning, but there is one fixed point every account agrees on. Nolan Wells was last seen on Horn Island at approximately 3 o'clock that afternoon. After that moment, the timeline becomes far less certain, and what should have been the end of an ordinary holiday celebration was about to become something else entirely. 3 o'clock in the afternoon marks the last confirmed sighting of Nolan on Horn Island. But it's not the only piece of audio to emerge from that day. 11 days after his disappearance, a second thread of this story surfaced, one that had been sitting in official records the entire time. On the 15th of July, 2026, NBC News reported it had obtained audio recordings tied to the case through a public records request. The audio, first detailed by NBC correspondent Aaron Gilchrist, reporting from Mississippi, captures a call for help. In it, some of Nolan's friends can be heard requesting towing assistance after their boat began malfunctioning out on the water near Horn Island. For 11 days, this detail sat unexplained. The audio confirmed a malfunction happened. It confirmed a call for towing assistance was made, but it didn't say what that malfunction actually was or how it connected to the rest of what unfolded that day. According to an account given directly to ABC News, the issue wasn't a vague mechanical hiccup. It was an electrical problem serious enough that the group was told the boat needed to head back to shore. That detail changes the shape of this story. This wasn't a boat that broke down and got towed home with everyone still aboard. This was a boat that had to leave, while people were still out in the water, still scattered across the island, still in the middle of a holiday that hadn't ended for them yet. And it's in that exact moment, the boat needing to return because of the electrical issue, that the timeline of July 4th quietly splits in two. One version continues on the water, aboard a boat heading back to the mainland. The other stays behind, on Horn Island. Nolan Wells belongs to the second version. Somewhere in the space between the boat needs to go back and the boat arrives at the dock without him, a decision got made about who was staying and who was leaving. What we can say with confidence, sourced directly and on the record, is this. A boat carrying some of Nolan's friends developed an electrical malfunction on July 4th. That malfunction forced the boat to return to shore, and Nolan Wells was not on it when it left. Exactly how that decision was made and who made it depends entirely on who you ask, and the more accounts that have surfaced, the more that question has splintered rather than resolved. The first official account came from Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter. Speaking to the Associated Press, Ledbetter offered a version built from early witness interviews. From the people we've talked to, Ledbetter said, it sounds like Nolan chose to stay on the island under the assumption that he would ride back to the mainland with someone else. On its own, there's nothing alarming about that. Beach days end this way all the time. But Javon Williams wasn't willing to leave it there. Williams wasn't just an acquaintance of Nolan's. By every account, he was Nolan's best friend, and he was on Horn Island with him that day. Williams later told the Biloxi Sun-Herald that he last saw Nolan sometime after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, hanging out with a girl and a few other friends. Williams also confirmed a detail that would later become significant. Both Nolan and the young woman had left their phones behind on the boat Nolan had originally taken out to the island. That young woman has since been identified in reporting as Katie. According to Nolan's best friend and others in the group, Nolan told them he wanted to stay behind to spend more time with her and would find his way back later with a different group. That's one version of the conversation, but it isn't the only one. Attorney Ben Crump, representing Nolan's family, has laid out what he calls a direct contradiction sitting at the heart of this case. According to Crump, Katie herself gave a different account entirely, telling him that Nolan had said the opposite, that he was going back to get on the boat with the boys, not staying behind, not waiting for a later ride. Going back, read those two versions side by side and the problem becomes obvious. The boys say Nolan told them he was staying to be with Katie. Katie, according to Crump, says Nolan told her he was going back to be with the boys. Both versions cannot be true at the same time. It's a contradiction, Crump has said plainly. They're not saying the same thing. One of them is telling the truth, and one of them is not. There's a reason this contradiction matters beyond simply who said what. The boat that Nolan didn't get back on wasn't leaving under ordinary circumstances. According to Ashley Cole, a Jackson County Chancery judge whose own son was on that boat, the vessel was dealing with a bilge pump issue, and her son left the island around 4:30 that afternoon because of it. Cole has said publicly that, as she understands it, Nolan made a decision to stay on the island and return later with another group entirely. That timeline lines up closely with when Williams says he last saw Nolan, but it still doesn't explain which version of that final conversation is the accurate one. The Katie contradiction isn't the only loose thread the family has raised. Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, has pointed to a discrepancy in what he was wearing. Police reports listed him in black shorts at the time he went missing, but Wansley says a young woman who was on the island that day reached out with photos showing him in blue shorts instead. The family has also described what they've called suspicious encounters while trying to retrieve Nolan's car keys, which had been left in a friend's driveway. And a family friend who helped track down Nolan's phone has pointed to another oddity. Despite Nolan regularly updating his Snapchat, the account showed no activity for the full 24 hours leading up to his disappearance, and the location tied to the account reportedly didn't match where his phone was ultimately found. It's important to say clearly that these details come from the family and those close to them. They have not been independently confirmed by investigators, and they remain allegations rather than established fact. What isn't in dispute is what happened next. At some point that afternoon, the boat carrying Nolan's friends made it back to the mainland dock in Jackson County. Nolan was not with them. For hours, that absence didn't register as an emergency, but as July 4th gave way to July 5th, that assumption broke down. Around 11 o'clock that night, one of Nolan's friends contacted the Coast Guard. Separately, around midnight, Nolan's mother contacted the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. By sunrise on July 5th, an ordinary holiday absence had become something else entirely. A search was about to begin. And underneath it all, the contradiction over that final conversation, the boat, the bilge pump, Katie, the boys, remained unresolved. By the time the search expanded beyond Horn Island itself, a piece of footage had already begun spreading faster than any official statement could keep up with. The video had been filmed from a nearby boat, capturing a scene near the northwestern tip of Horn Island, the same stretch the sheriff's department would later ask the public to send footage of. In the clip, a young man can be heard yelling, clearly agitated. Almost as soon as it began circulating, a theory attached itself to the footage, that the voice belonged to Nolan Wells, caught in a heated altercation just hours before he vanished. Attorney Ben Crump gave that theory weight, saying publicly that the video captured what sounded like Nolan asking for his phone back and demanding to know what was happening. Then Trace Seston Shepard stepped forward. Shepard and Nolan had been part of the same tight circle of friends since freshman year at Ocean Springs High School. "That's me yelling," Shepard said in an interview with ABC News. Nolan wasn't even in the video. As Shepard explained it, the moment began as a disagreement between him and his girlfriend. Another young man nearby criticized the conversation, and things turned physical between Shepard and that man. Shepard's uncle told him to get back onto the family boat to cool off. Once aboard, Shepard wanted to go right back and finish the fight, while friends on shore defended him. It was around then that an adult on a nearby boat began filming, capturing Shepard shouting to be let off the boat so he could get back in the fight. That's the yelling on the video, not a phone, not Nolan. Shepard's account didn't stand alone. His girlfriend and his uncle both corroborated the story to reporters, as did a family friend seen in the video trying to calm him down. Shepard also addressed a second piece of viral content, a photo shared by Crump's own Instagram account, appearing to show Nolan alive at a pool party in the early morning hours of July 5th. Independent reporting has since confirmed that photo was actually taken weeks earlier at a different location and simply recirculated without its original context. Shepard offered a simple explanation for the confusion. Nearly everyone at the gathering had left their phones on the boats before getting into the water, which meant very few photos or videos actually existed from the hours investigators cared most about. Shepard said he chose to speak publicly, after first giving his full statement to police because he wanted his version on the record. He also pushed back against how the case was being framed. Shepard, who is biracial, said he took issue with the narrative being built entirely around race before the investigation had run its course. That decision to speak out has come at a cost. Shepard said he and his friends have received death threats since the video went viral. "We did no wrong here," he said, "and we don't understand how we're getting so much hate. One detail deserves to be addressed honestly, rather than smoothed over." In reporting that surfaced after Shepard went public, Nolan's parents have been quoted saying they don't know Tristan Shepard, a statement that sits in tension with Shepard's account of a friendship going back to freshman year. That report comes from a single outlet, and it's possible it reflects a wide friend group rather than any dishonesty on Shepard's part. But it's an open question this video isn't going to pretend away. What Shepard has asked for, more than anything, is patience, for people to let the investigation run its course and the facts speak for themselves. For now, one piece of this case has narrowed. The altercation in that viral video, by every corroborated account, did not involve Nolan Wells. But narrowing one thread doesn't close the case. By the morning of the 5th of July, 2026, what had started as a holiday absence had become something far more urgent. Nolan Wells had not come home. He hadn't been in contact with anyone, and the boat that had carried him out to Horn Island the day before had returned to the mainland without him. There was no version of that combination of facts that allowed for calm any longer. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department made it official that day, launching a coordinated search that quickly expanded beyond what a single agency could manage. The United States Coast Guard was brought in. So was Mississippi's Department of Marine Resources and the National Park Service. Volunteer groups mobilized too, including the United Cajun Navy, a nonprofit search and rescue organization based in Louisiana that has become a familiar presence at disasters and search efforts across the Gulf Coast. Brian Trasher, the group's vice president, took part in the search himself, and he later offered a detail that added real weight to the case for an accidental drowning. Speaking to CNN, Trasher said he'd spoken with several people who had been at Horn Island on July 4th, and they described the beach as packed, boats anchored together, people everywhere, some of them drinking throughout the day. Trasher pointed to something else too, something easy to overlook in a crowd that large, on a beach that festive. If someone had gone into the water and gotten into trouble, he said, strong rip currents that day may have posed a real risk. It's a sobering thought that in the middle of hundreds of people celebrating, a single person slipping beneath the surface might not be noticed until it was already too late.
Search was underway
teams
for
weren't
Wells,
working from a fixed
but it wasn't
base
until
with easy
just
access
before
in and
9
out.
a.m. on
Every
Monday,
vessel,
a body
every
was
searcher,
discovered by a
every
U.S.
piece of
Park
equipment
Service
had to be
ranger.
brought out by boat across open water to comb a shoreline
Actually
that
told
shifts with
ABC
the
News that
tides
they
and
suspected
drops
Wells
off
had drowned,
unpredictably
something
from
his
shallow
parents say was
water
unlikely
into
because
depths
they
of 20
say
feet or
Wells was a
more
good swimmer.
within just a few steps. On the morning of the 6th of July, 2026, a United States park ranger, moving along the shoreline near the northwestern tip of Horn Island, found a body in the water in that same general area where Nolan and his friends had spent their 4th of July. Formal confirmation didn't come immediately. Coroner Bruce Lynn told WLOX News by phone he had no reason to believe the body wasn't Nolan's, but wanted proper confirmation first. That came the next day. Around 2 o'clock on Tuesday, July 7th, Lynn confirmed the body had been positively identified as Nolan Wells based on dental records. That same day, the state autopsy was performed at the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office Coast Lab. Sheriff Ledbetter said there was currently no indication of drug or alcohol use, though a fuller picture would only come once toxicology results were in, which officials said could take up to 2 weeks. Lind also spoke about what his office had observed. There were, he said, no immediate, obvious signs of trauma on the body. That statement alone isn't an answer. Lind was careful in how he described what came next, and that carefulness matters. Because of the condition in which Nolan's body was found, Lind's office made a specific request that the autopsy be conducted not locally, but at the state medical examiner's office, where a full and thorough examination could definitively determine whether there had been any trauma or any indication of foul play. That's a critical distinction. This wasn't a coroner ruling out foul play. This was a coroner explaining why the question couldn't be answered yet, and why it needed to go through a more rigorous process before anyone could say anything with certainty. That distinction got lost almost immediately in the public conversation. On July 6th, the same day the body was found, the sheriff's department released a statement saying no foul play was suspected. To a grieving family and a watching public, those words landed as a conclusion. But according to Charles Ramsey, a CNN law enforcement analyst and former police chief in both Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., that phrasing was likely a poor choice of words rather than an actual finding. What the sheriff's department almost certainly meant, according to Ramsey, was that there were no immediate, obvious signs of foul play, which is a very different statement than saying foul play has been ruled out. It's the difference between a first glance and a final answer. And in a case where a family had already lost their son, that difference in language did real damage to the level of trust between investigators and the people demanding answers. Ramsey offered some broader context that's easy to lose sight of when a case moves this fast in the public eye. It is not unusual, he said, for law enforcement to take a week or longer gathering the evidence and conducting the interviews necessary to determine what actually caused a death. Toxicology testing alone, according to Ramsey, can take anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to come back. None of that is unique to this case. What made this case different, in Ramsey's assessment, wasn't the pace of the investigation. It was the intensity of the attention surrounding it. On July 7th, the same day Nolan was formally identified, his family retained attorney Ben Crump, who stated the family intended to conduct an independent review and press for the timely release of all records, witness accounts, and autopsy findings. From that point forward, this was no longer just a local investigation. On July 8th, the sheriff's department acknowledged the growing wave of online speculation, saying investigators were working to establish the facts through eyewitness accounts and physical evidence. For many watching, it wasn't enough. If you're still with us, drop "I'm still here" in the comments, because it's about to get even more complicated. This is the part of the case that changed everything. On July 10th, Christine Wansley said at a news conference that she respected law enforcement, but the framing around an accidental drowning had left her and her husband uncomfortable. Why, she asked, were investigators so quick to rush toward that explanation? "What we're wanting," she said, "is transparency." Underneath that frustration sat a grievance tied directly to Nolan's phone. The family has alleged that messages appeared to have been erased from the device before it was returned to them, an unresolved but serious claim that explains why the phone became such a central piece of this story. That demand for transparency didn't fade as the days went on. It escalated, and on Wednesday, July 15th, it reached a new and significant milestone. For the first time since their son's body had been recovered, Nolan's parents sat down face-to-face with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath. The meeting took place at the District Attorney's office in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and by all accounts, it was respectful in tone, with both sides described as honest and candid in their discussion. But respectful doesn't mean resolved. Crump later confirmed that the family did not walk away from that meeting with any significant new information about the investigation itself. What they did walk away with was a commitment. McElrath explained the legal process that would follow once the sheriff's department completes its investigation, and confirmed that her office will present the case to a grand jury once that work is finished. It's worth pausing on what that actually means, because it's a detail that gets misunderstood easily in a case this emotionally charged. According to Ronald Reichlach, a law professor at the University of Mississippi, a grand jury in a case like this is typically made up of somewhere between 15 and 25 citizens who review the evidence a prosecutor presents and decide whether there's enough to move forward with formal charges. Convening one is standard procedure for unnatural or suspicious deaths in Jackson County. It does not on its own imply that a crime occurred or that anyone is being accused of anything. It's a process, not a verdict. But for a family that has spent weeks demanding a thorough and transparent investigation, it represented forward motion. Crump was direct about what he hoped that process would accomplish. "A thorough investigation must be completed," he said, "and the district attorney must put every relevant fact before the grand jury. Nothing held back, nothing overlooked. Our lived experiences," he said, "tell us that we must question everything. Everybody's role, law enforcement's role." That same Wednesday meeting produced one more significant development. Both sides, the family's legal team and Jackson County investigators, agreed to a mutual inspection of Nolan's cell phone to be conducted by independent experts representing each party. Given the family's allegation about missing messages, this agreement represented one of the first concrete steps toward resolving that specific piece of the dispute through an actual process, rather than leaving it as an accusation with no clear path to being confirmed or ruled out. The investigation's reach extended beyond Jackson County entirely that same week. The FBI's Jackson field office issued a statement addressing its role in the case, and it was carefully worded in a way that kept one thing clear above all else. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office remains the lead agency on this investigation. The FBI's statement described a long-standing, trusted partnership between Jackson County and federal investigators and said that federal tools and partnerships had proven valuable in supporting that local investigation from the very beginning. But separately, and just as significantly, the FBI has also assisted with matters involving threats made against individuals connected to this case. That detail confirms something this investigation had already made painfully clear in other ways. The danger in this story isn't confined to whatever happened to Nolan Wells on July 4th. It has extended outward into the lives of the friends who were with him, some of whom have described receiving death threats since the case went viral. On July 15th, the Congressional Black Caucus issued its own statement. Too many questions remain unanswered, and the Wells family, the Mississippi community, and the American people deserve a full, transparent, independent, and timely investigation. A case that began as a local missing persons report had, within 11 days, drawn a formal statement from Congress. That same day, filmmaker Tyler Perry, who committed to covering the family's funeral expenses, explained his decision was personal. "I know what it's like," he said, "to not have the answers that loved ones so desperately need." 11 days. That's how long this case has existed in the public eye. From a boat pulling away from Horn Island without Nolan Wells aboard, to a federal investigation, a congressional statement, and a funeral date set. And after all of that, after every account, every correction, every piece of audio and video that surfaced, the central question at the heart of this story remains exactly where it started. What happened to Nolan Wells? Let's start with what should have been the clearest answer by now, and isn't. 2 separate autopsies have been conducted. The first, performed by the state medical examiner in Mississippi, was completed within days of Nolan's body being recovered. The second, an independent autopsy, was requested by Nolan's family because, in Crump's words, the story they were being told simply wasn't adding up. Nolan's body was flown from Mississippi to Washington, D.C., specifically so that a doctor with no ties whatsoever to Mississippi law enforcement could conduct that independent examination. That independent autopsy was originally expected to produce results by Friday, July 10th. That deadline came and went. Crump has said the delay wasn't about anything uncovered in the findings themselves, but about logistical issues transporting Nolan's body. It's an important distinction to sit with. A delay caused by transportation is not the same as a delay caused by a complicated or troubling result. As of the most recent reporting available, neither the state autopsy nor the independent one has produced public results. Not the cause of death, not the manner of death, not the toxicology findings that both sides have said they're still waiting on. It's worth understanding why that silence has stretched on this long, because the answer isn't sinister on its own. According to Charles Ramsey, toxicology testing alone can routinely take 2 to 3 weeks to come back, even in cases without this level of public attention. A spokesperson for the Mississippi Department of Public Safety echoed that same point, saying every case is unique and deserves a thorough review, and that cases simply cannot all be handled on the same timeline. That means, realistically, results may still be days away, possibly longer. If you're watching this video hoping we can tell you today, definitively, how Nolan Wells died, we can't. Nobody can yet. Not the state, not the family's independent examiner, not the sheriff's department. That's not a failure of this investigation. It's simply where things stand right now. That doesn't mean nothing has been happening behind the scenes. Sheriff Ledbetter has said his department has continued conducting witness interviews and has stayed in contact with other agencies, including the FBI, throughout this past week. He specifically credited the public with helping move things forward, saying that a call for tips put out the week before had proven genuinely productive for investigators. Colin Kaepernick helped fund the independent autopsy. Tyler Perry is covering the funeral expenses. Reverend Al Sharpton, who stood beside the family at their first press conference, will officiate the funeral himself. That funeral is set for Monday, the 20th of July, 2026, at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs, with visitation from 9 to 11 in the morning. If you've seen earlier reporting referencing the Coast Coliseum as the venue, that plan has since changed. Following the service, Christine Wansley says there will be a celebration of life at the Jackson County Fairgrounds, what she's calling a homegoing celebration. He would not want us sitting around crying, she said. And still, underneath the funeral plans, the donations, the outpouring of public support, the central contradiction from earlier in this case remains completely unresolved. One young woman says Nolan told her he was heading back to rejoin his friends on the boat. His friends say Nolan told them he was staying behind to be with her. Ben Crump has been unambiguous about what that means. They're not saying the same thing, he said. One of them is telling the truth, and one of them is not. 11 days later, nobody outside of those directly involved knows which version is accurate. Once the sheriff's department completes its investigation, every witness account, every piece of evidence, every contradiction will be presented to a grand jury. This case isn't going to fade out once public attention moves elsewhere. There is a structured, legal mechanism now committed to putting the full picture in front of an impartial panel of citizens whenever that investigation officially concludes. We don't know yet how Nolan Wells died. We don't know which account of that final conversation is true. What we do know is that this story isn't over. The toxicology results will come back. The grand jury process will move forward. And when those answers arrive, we'll be here to cover them. If you want to know what happens next, make sure you're subscribed, because we will not be dropping this story until Nolan Wells' family finally gets the answers they've been asking for since the moment he didn't come home.